Bitcoin miners, they're not location specific. They don't have to be in a certain area. All they need to find is cheap stranded electricity. There's street stranded electricity, even if it's in the middle of the Sahara. I guarantee you in 10 years, you will find a pleb there with an S9, right? That's just how it is, right? All right, so a lot of mining news lately that we've been covering, and we have Zach on the show today, so it's perfect to cover these topics. Kazakhstan expects at least $1.5 billion in economic activity from really Bitcoin mining. It's really Bitcoin mining. The vast majority of that, I would say 99% is Bitcoin mining, but of course it's Cointelegraph. So, anyways, let's check out the article, shall we? A report from the Data Center Industry and Blockchain Association of Kazakhstan, or NABDC, estimated that cryptocurrency mining could bring $1.5 billion in revenue for the country over the next 5 years. Currently, corporate digital currency mining activities generate about 98 billion teng, or $230 million per year in the country. This is a quote from the NABDC. The figure of $238 million is just an economic effect from companies that are officially involved in mining. If we take into account the gray miners, then this figure can be safely multiplied by 2. Now, this is what we've been talking about for many, many months now about the economic incentives of Bitcoin. Remember that the reason that Kazakhstan has so much economic activity of mining is because of the infamous China ban. And a lot of those Chinese miners, where did they migrate to? They migrated to Kazakhstan. So when we say, when New York State banned Bitcoin mining, or when China banned Bitcoin mining, we always say, you guys have fun staying poor. This is what we're talking about. Bitcoin, if you self-custody Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners, they're not location specific. They don't have to be in a certain area. All they need to find is cheap stranded electricity. There's street stranded electricity, even if it's in the middle of the Sahara. I guarantee you in 10 years, you will find a pleb there with an S9, right? That's just how it is, right? That's the economic incentives of Bitcoin. But check this out, the economic incentives of Bitcoin, and we covered this, but we're going to talk about it again today because Zach actually wrote a very good article and I wanted to ask him about it. The economics of Bitcoin are so strong that even after China did this giant clusterfuck of a mistake that's going to cost them trillions of dollars, Chinese citizens are still mining Bitcoin underground. But according to this article, right, there was a sudden reemergence of the Bitcoin miners in China. But like Zach pointed out, that wasn't sudden. They always stayed there. It was just the way that they were reporting it that seemed like they disappeared and then they came back, right? So, Zach, a couple questions, right? What do you think of Kazakhstan? Why did they get the data on China wrong? Why, like, what were those miners always kind of in the gray? I know they weren't industrial miners. I know the industrial miners did actually leave China. That's what caused the hash rate drop. But why did they report it wrong for so long? If it's still estimated between 10 to 20% of the hash rate is still located in China, even though the last time I saw, if you get caught transacting in Bitcoin by the Supreme Court of China, it's like 10 years in prison, some crazy number. But yeah, that's the economic incentives of Bitcoin, right? China bans Bitcoin mining. That economic opportunity moves to a friendlier jurisdiction. They win. China loses. But even with the Chinese government still putting pressure, the Chinese people still want to mine Bitcoin because the incentives are so strong. So, Zach, what are your thoughts on all that? And why did they get the reporting so wrong?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think Kazakhstan is kind of like a very interesting case, like in the tailwinds of all this China stuff, because as you mentioned, a lot of miners did migrate there, in addition to, obviously like different parts of North America and even parts of Latin America and, pretty much everywhere else in the world. But a good chunk of it went to Kazakhstan. And then sort of over the course of the 6 to 8 months after the China ban, the Kazakhstan government was like, all right, that's like kind of enough. And then basically what they did is like set a cap and like everyone who's here can stay here. And if you want to build new mining farms, then you like have to I think they limited to like 1 to 10 megawatts or something. And then they just the other week published like a very formal list of like reporting rules and all this stuff. So like, and they also revoked some like tax incentives for miners that previously existed. So like Kazakhstan today is definitely a much less friendly place for miners than it was, even just a year ago. But there's still a lot of hash rate there, and a lot of miners left China to go there. But there's a non-trivial amount of miners who kind of got screwed twice because they left China, and then they went to Kazakhstan, and then all these rules were implemented and incentives revoked. And now they're looking for a third place to relocate to. So I guess the moral of that story is there's always unpredictable like geopolitical risk for mining wherever you end up. And obviously like Kazakhstan isn't like a full crackdown like China, and something like that probably is very unlikely to happen in somewhere like North America, US and Canada. But there's a non-0% chance that it could happen anywhere. So like long term, the most nimble miners will always win. And that kind of brings us full circle to like the hash rate in China now, because those are the type of miners that are still online in China, the smaller scale, very nimble, much less easy to detect. And like you mentioned, the big industrial scale miners, they had no choice. They had to unplug and either relocate, or a bunch of miners in China just opted to put their machines in storage and sit on their thumbs basically and like see what happens. But Steve Barber from Upstream Data talks about this a lot. He's a huge champion of like the home mining ecosystem, which I love. And he, beats the drum a lot on, the small scale at home nimble miners are the ones who are, sorry, I don't know if you could hear that. There's a horn back there. He champions a lot the small nimble at home miners who can outlast and are much like harder to detect than, and I love Riot and Bitfarms and all these guys, but they're not exactly like the most nimble mining setups in the world. So the point is like hash rate those in China has always been there. And what hash rate is that? It's, small scale mining operations. Maybe like a small sliver of it is like politically tied, and people are just getting favors and looking the other way, and but I think that's probably not a huge part of it. And there definitely was not like a huge resurgence in hash rate there because there's several reasons. I kind of outlined some of the big ones in, like you mentioned, an article from Bitcoin Magazine. Mostly just I got fed up with people like trumpeting this data everywhere, like 0% hash rate in China a year ago, and now like boom, 20%. Like, okay, did China like reverse their ban?
It was always there. It was always there. We were saying that too, Phil. We're like, yeah, it's there. Oh man.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop rambling there, but like there's a lot to unpack. It was reported wrong. There's lots of good reasons why the hash rate is still there. And those miners are the ones who, like, if they can survive that full crackdown on China, those are the types of miners who can survive anything. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights, right, the mobility of the Bitcoin network and how this concept that I always kept telling you guys, how it moves the balance of power from the state to the individual, right? And I think that those nimble miners, like you said, Zach, in China is a really good representation of that, right? Especially with the consequences that there are. And I remember I reached out to a buddy of mine who lives in the mainland, and I said, hey, and I actually said this on Unconfiscatable as well, when we did the panel together, Zach. And I said, hey, aren't you concerned that they're banning Bitcoin mining? He's like, he doesn't say dude, but he's like Niku, which is apparently how you pronounce my name in Mandarin. He's like, Niku, they've banned this 5 times. What doesn't kill the honey badger makes it stronger. And I was like, what? They're using the same language? What's going on here? So anyways, Phil, I know you've had experience setting up an S9 at home. So what are your thoughts on all this, my friend?
Yeah, no, so you know what? I really enjoyed that experience. And like I told you, Nico, if nothing else, I think it's worth it to at the very least, set up an at-home miner, get it connected to a pool, and run your own miner, look at the stats, get to know the Bitcoin network from that aspect. I really, when Nico would tell me at the beginning, you really need to see it from the aspect of a miner, it's completely different. And it's true. You don't really have that full, I personally did not have that full appreciation for the entirety of the Bitcoin network without setting up a miner. That being said, to Zach's point, the home miners are really underestimated, and the nimble miners are resilient miners. And that's really why I think they are underestimated. It's because people just look at big farms, right? Like at the end of the day, a lot of times people just think bigger is better, the more machines you have and all this stuff. But look at what China proved. Or again, because we didn't have clear data, what we believe that China proved is that these nimble miners could just simply get up, move operations, keep things going. And that says a lot, again, for the resilience of the Bitcoin network as well. So yeah, I'm very I wouldn't say that I'm surprised that hash rate came back online, because again, we're not really sure how much of it was really lost lost. But I think it's interesting that reporting came out, because you know the Chinese government looks at news from outside, right? So I wonder what they think of this news, or are they the ones running those miners?
Oh man, I don't know. I definitely some of them. I don't know.